Have you ever had one of those conversations with an AI where you're really getting somewhere, and then it's like it gets amnesia? It just suddenly forgets something you talked about a few minutes ago. Well, what's really going on is an amnesia. It's a core limitation of the system, and it explains that exact confusing moment. So picture this. You're deep into a project. Maybe you're summarizing a long document, and you're having this really long, productive back and forth with an AI. You're making real progress. And then bam, out of nowhere, it seems to have zero memory of the crucial things you talked about right at the very beginning. Yeah, it's a super frustrating and kind of weird experience. And that's exactly what this explainer's all about. We're going to get into what is actually happening right then and there and why it's not really a bug, but a basic part of its design. Okay, so let's walk through exactly how this happens. The whole confusion comes from the gap between how we expect a conversation to work, like with a person, and how the system is actually operating under the hood. Let's say you start by giving it a big chunk of text. Maybe it's a long report or a chapter from a book. And the AI seems to get it, no problem. First, you ask a bunch of questions about the introduction. The answers are great. Then you move on. Maybe you jump to the end and start talking about the conclusions. The conversation is flowing just like you'd hope. And now you try to tie it all together. You want to connect something from the end back to an idea from the very beginning. So you ask another question about that first section. And this is where it gets weird. This is the mismatch. The AI gives you an answer, but it's off. It's not just a little bit wrong. It talks as if the beginning of the document you just discussed never existed. It's completely ignored. And of course, your brain immediately tries to figure this out. Did it forget? Did it get confused? Did it change its mind? These are totally normal questions, but they're based on how a human mind works. What's actually happening is something completely different. The real answer to this little puzzle is a core concept for how these models work. It's called the context window. So what is that? Well, you can think of the context window as the AI's short-term attention span. It's a fixed amount of space that holds all the text it can look at for any single task. And here's the absolute key to understanding this. We call it memory, but for the system, it's just input. It's not storing a long-term record of your chat. It's only looking at the chunk of text it's been given in that specific moment. This is how it creates that feeling of a continuous conversation. Every single time you ask a new question, the system secretly takes your entire chat history, your prompts, its answers, all of it, and sends it back to the model as one big block of text. So you can see what's coming, right? As you have a longer and longer conversation, that giant block of text, that input, just keeps growing with every single turn you take. Eventually, that block of text hits the size limit, the maximum size of the context window. And when that happens, the system has to make a choice. To make room for your new question, it just deletes the oldest stuff from the top. The beginning of your conversation is literally cut off and thrown away. So you're probably thinking, why? Why does this limit exist? Why not just make the context window huge or even infinite? And the answer comes down to a really important trade-off in engineering and, frankly, in cost. So the people building these systems have a choice. They can give an AI a larger context window, which is great for long, complex conversations. But that comes at a serious cost. The AI gets slower, and it costs a lot more to run. On the flip side, a smaller window is way faster and cheaper, but, well, it can't hold as much information. And to really get a feel for that cost, you have to understand that the relationship here isn't one-to-one. Making the window a little bigger doesn't make the cost a little bigger. No, it scales quadratically. That means just doubling the amount of text the model can process at once requires 4 times the amount of computing power. That cost skyrockets so fast that a truly massive or infinite context window just isn't practical right now. Okay, so now that we get the idea of the context window and the trade-offs involved, let's go all the way back to that confusing moment we started with. The AI didn't actually forget anything. The whole idea of forgetting doesn't quite fit because it never truly remembered the way a person does in the first place. When you asked about the beginning of that document for the second time, your long conversation had already pushed all that early stuff right out of the context window. From the model's point of view, it was gone. It simply wasn't part of the input it was given for that prompt. One of our sources says it perfectly. When the context window reaches its limit, the model discards the oldest tokens. It's a simple, automatic process. It's first in, first out.
So the AI didn't change its mind or get confused. The context, the actual information it needed to answer your question correctly, had just expired. And that explains why the system behaved the way it did. It wasn't a bug, it was just the system working exactly as it was designed to, within its own limits.